get to the money. Gotta get to the money. Early morning, so you know that I'm on it. So you know that I'm on it. Gotta make sure that my family's straight. Gotta make sure that my kids and me. Gotta make sure that.
Welcome to another episode of Drinking After Dark, a podcast where we discuss random topics while having a few drinks. I'm your host, Darius, and as always, drink responsibly. And y'all make sure y'all follow Drinking After Dark podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to Drinking After Dark podcast YouTube channel. Tonight, I'm drinking on, I'm not drinking on anything, man. I'm just drinking on some tropical punch tonight with a little vodka. So, um, something a little different, man, just something different for tonight episode. Um, Hope everybody had a great week, having a great weekend. Sorry about last week, man. There's something I waited this week to do this episode because what I'm gonna talk about tonight, because I actually had to watch it. Um, but over the weekend, I was good and everything. Some great games came on. Georgia, Alabama, obviously. Also too, my Steelers lost their first game of the season, but hey, you know, we weren't meant to go undefeated anyway. But it was a great game. They almost came back. Proud of my Steelers like always. So I'm proud of that. Now, let's get into tonight's episode. We got to talk about it. If anybody who like me grew up watching wrestling, I'm 36 years old, so I remember elementary school, mid 90s. I remember when the uh the Monday Night Wars first started, right? Between WCW and WWE, which was known as WWF back then. I remember the Monday Night Wars. I watched more WCW than I did WWE back then. One, it came on an hour early and it was live. It wasn't taped like WWE was back then. But needless to say, I did watch both as a kid. Huge fan of a lot of these wrestling stars. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Rock, Sting, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. Who else? I was a fan. Bret Hart. Bret Hart was actually the wrestler that got me into watching wrestling. And it wasn't watching wrestling, it was the wrestling games. And I always played with Bret Hart. So Bret Hart was the guy that got me into wrestling. Obviously, The Undertaker, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Kane. Who else was out there? Booker T. I remember Rey Mysterio in WCW. Chris Jericho, and the list could go on and on. I mean, listen, it could it could just go on and on and on. DDP, Diamond Dallas Page, and stuff like that. But where am I getting at? Talking about the Netflix docu-series, Mr. McMahon. Okay. Now I watched this series, and I'm gonna give you just my overall take on it. Um, Before I get into everything else. My overall take is this. It really didn't move me. And the reason being why it didn't move me was because a lot of the stuff that they talked about, I already knew. Right. Anytime you look at the docu-series and things like that, you have all these different companies that doing, whether it's Netflix, whether it could be like Hulu, it could be Prime Video, it could be who else is out there? I mean, even you got Tubi out there now. Whatever the case may be. Okay, any company that's doing it. Um, Paramount Plus. You want to learn stuff, even though you think you know it all. You want to find out things that you probably never heard of before, right? And that's the purpose of the uh the docu-series. So when they went over the docu series, I was not impressed. So I watched all these episodes. I watched all these episodes of the docu series, and I don't know. I don't. I really can't. I just wasn't overall impressed with it. Okay. Now let's get into the docu series. Vince McMahon, if y'all know, probably, well, no, not probably, is the greatest wrestling promoter of all time. We got to give him that, right? We got to give him that title. What he did for the wrestling business as a whole. I mean, he's at the top of the mountain, right? As a whole, right? Now, from the beginning, if anybody knows the story, he actually didn't meet his father until he was around 12 years old. He was grew up. Stepfather was very abusive and things like that. Didn't meet his father till he was 12. Um, when he got older, he started working for his father, who owned the company first. It was pretty much in the East Coast, the Northeast region. That's where his territory. And back in those days, it was many different wrestling promotions, which they had a territory, right? And it was a thing of, this is my territory. You don't come in and invade someone else's territory, right? It's kind of like if you do that, you asking for trouble. Um, After a while, Vince McMahon. Oh well, go back for a second. Vince McMahon grew up. He didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. Okay, so his story is kind of like it's basically a rags to riches story, and you probably start to understand his mindset more as more we talk about this. I'll bring that up later on in the episode. But pretty much a rags to riches story. He went and worked for his father before he bought the company from his father, and he had the mindset of really growing the company, really growing the company, and he uh, he did just that. So he went out and he got top talent from other promotions, and basically paid. He didn't create these characters. These wrestlers were already established, big in their promotions. So in order for your business to grow, you have to basically invest money in the talent to help your company grow. And that's what he did. Okay. Now, what I did know was that Gorilla Monsoon, who legendary wrestler, actually, I think he owned the company with Vince Senior, and I guess that's who you know was basically going to own the company outright until Vince McMahon came in and pretty much took over and everything like that. Uh, another thing I would honestly say about Vince McMahon, he did have a vision. His vision couldn't be matched. I felt like while everybody else during that time was playing checkers, he was playing chess. He was playing the long game. Okay, and as you can see, I mean, the WWE brand still stands to this day, still as strong as ever to this day, because of the vision of Vince McMahon. So you gotta give him that credit. He really took that company that his dad started and took it to on an international level. Okay. Uh so back then wrestlers they they worked like nonstop work. 7 days on the road, 7 days a week. If you didn't wrestle, you didn't get paid and everything like that. And this is where probably start seeing a little bit behind the scenes in terms of the business aspect of it. Jesse the Body Ventura, he if y'all know, for one, legendary wrestler, Hall of Fame, uh, former governor of Minnesota, also a veteran, and he did something that I felt like, I mean, he was in the right. Okay, he tried to unionize these wrestlers because of, you know, I mean, listen, when you work, there's no benefits. There's, you look at the pay, the amount of days you work. Yeah, unionize. He was trying to do that. This is where Hulk Hogan comes into play. Hulk Hogan, we all know, is the guy that basically, when you're talking about wrestling superstars, right? Wrestling superstars. Hulk Hogan, biggest name in professional wrestling, right? And there were other big names in professional wrestling during that time. Andre the Giant, you know, uh, even back then you had Ric Flair, those guys. And you talking about top talents in each territory, like the Junkyard Dog in his territory was the big dog and all that. But Hulk Hogan first actually worked for Vince's father, right? And then he started working for Vince. Hulk Hogan, pretty much at this time was in the WWE, and he pretty much snitched on uh Jesse the Body Ventura and basically said this is what they're going to do. And which I felt like that was, if I was a wrestler in that situation, I would look at him like, oh, he's about himself. And I guess, Vince said he came to the head of the meeting and said, hey, I know about this meeting. If you go, you're fired, won't get paid, things like that, which is, I mean, I think it's stupid. I think for Vince, not Vince, Hulk Hogan to go and basically behind everybody's backs and said this was going on. I said, man, to me, that's a punk move, right? And I felt like Hulk Hogan, and through this, I'll talk about Hulk Hogan in a little bit, but Hulk Hogan is Hulk Hogan. It's a big name, still one of the biggest names in wrestling, still to this day, ever. So, um, yeah, so that's what he did. And speaking of Hulk Hogan to me, I always felt like he was about Hulk Hogan and not about the wrestling business. Like you could use like the wrestling business as a way to say you're doing the things that you're doing. But when you look at this docu-series and you hear about Hulk Hogan and everything, Hulk Hogan was about Hulk Hogan. I don't think he really cared about anyone else but himself after I watched this docu-series. Um, but Vince McMahon did, he had his brain in terms of the wrestling business. Vince McMahon's brain, it was just so genius, right? Uh, they talked about how he created WrestleMania, pretty much create like the Super Bowl of wrestling while he was on vacation with his wife, Linda McMahon, and had an idea, right? When he's supposed to be on vacation, but when you're a workaholic, your brain doesn't stop working, so he came up with WrestleMania and banked everything on it. First, WrestleMania was a success. Number two, not so much. It wasn't. But WrestleMania three, um, very very successful. And you look at what WrestleMania has become to this day, um, the biggest sports entertainment event. Period. Right now is a two-night event. All right, so it's it's something that if even if you're not a wrestling fan, if you have a chance to go and experience WrestleMania, I would suggest you do it. Unless you have your parties at home, like hey, we're gonna have a WrestleMania party. Let's do this and all of that. So, but yeah, WrestleMania, big deal. Now, one of the things that we knew about when it came to this docu series and WWE. It was during the time where they had that whole steroid scandal that went on. Okay, now they talked about how this scandal all got started. They had a doctor that was I forget, was he hired? I think he was hired by the athletic commission there. Basically, a doctor was involved and who worked for the company. I guess I forgot that dynamic how that worked. But during this time, it was a big steroids scandal that went in. You look at the wrestlers, you have a lot of wrestlers that admitted to using steroids, everything like that. Hulk Hogan even trying to deny it on the Arsenio Hall show, which they mentioned in the documentary. And Vince McMahon basically told him, "Hey man, just tell the truth." And he didn't tell the truth, and it kind of backfired on him. But this is at the time where I don't, if y'all remember American Gladiators, right? During that whole time, you got the bodybuilders and this and that. Steroids was a big thing. And of course, with baseball later on, like 10 plus years later, you know, it popped up again, but that's with baseball. But at the time, you look at the bodybuilders, you look at the professional wrestlers, you look at the athletes they had on American Gladiators, they were using steroids, right? But I just felt like they attacked uh WWE, Vince McMahon, because they felt like he was the one that was distributing steroids to the wrestlers, which he had no bit he didn't do that. All right, but he was the face of it. He was the face of it, and obviously the key witness was gonna be Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan, you know, one thing I know about Hulk Hogan, he's gonna be loyal to people that's loyal to him. That's what it is. And I just felt like it was a time where, it put everybody on notice, right? That's what it did. It put everybody on notice. So they talked about the steroid scandal, which it didn't really get anywhere. They went to trial, not guilty. That's that. Now, the women of that time, okay, the women of that time, uh, let me put my glasses back on. So they also, well, hold on. So they mentioned how during that time, it was a bad place for women to work, be around the business. And one of the guys that I want to who really was very transparent in this docu series was Tony Atlas. If you haven't seen it, Tony Atlas, he basically was just so open and honest. Um, he was just open and honest, right, about everything, right? Any question they asked him, open and honest. And basically, it was a bad place for women to be around. Uh, it was alleged that the ring boys who were underage were allegedly abused by someone in the company. Uh, Rita Marie, she was the first female referee. Okay, first female referee. She accused Miss McMahon of assault, sexual assault, accused of. And there was like a one thing about this docu series I didn't know about. I think this is the only thing I really didn't know. There was a rivalry in this business, but it wasn't between wrestlers. When you think about all the great rivalries in the wrestling business, you think about Stone Cold versus The Rock. You think about NWO versus WCW, WCW versus WWE, right? But this particular rivalry even still goes on to this day. Is between a writer and Vince McMahon. His name, Phil, was it Mutchicks? I guess that's his name. I I guess that's his name. Mushchicks, something like that. He's a writer. He didn't like Vince McMahon or the WWE. and he just didn't like him. I mean, every piece he put out was negative about this company. How do you have so much hate against one company? I don't get it. I have no idea. I get it. Listen, one thing about wrestling, it's for the imagination. It's entertainment, right? Now, are the matches scripted? Yes. The injuries, they are real. Okay, they are real. You know, they take some real injuries. I mean, we'll get into this a little later, but head injuries, you look at um the back injuries, shoulder injuries, neck injuries. You look at ACLs and things like that, which were in your career back then, but now you could come back from. Uh Also they talked about how WCW into uh came into the picture and basically became WWE's pretty much biggest competitor. Now, with that being said, Vince McMahon uh was a little bit of a hypocrite in this regard. So the way Vince McMahon grew his business was by taking top talent from other territories and you going into those territories uh for your events, right? What happened with WCW? You know what WCW did? They started taking their top talent. They started taking WWE's talent and you know, hey, look, open the checkbook, more money, uh, less work days, of course, and there were guaranteed contracts. So he did that, and obviously, Ted Turner, who was the owner at the time of WCW, billionaire Ted is what they call him. Uh, CNN, TNT, TBS, Ted Turner. So he had the money. Like, hey, I'm just gonna sign these guys. You know, trying to run them out of business. Eric Bischoff was in charge of WCW, and WCW was rolling for 83 weeks. That's how long they was on top. 83 weeks. One of their biggest they Hulk Hogan. Excuse me. Hulk Hogan went into Hollywood. What do I think about Hulk Hogan's Hollywood career? Not good. Okay. Uh, and yet he came to WCW. He was always known as the good guy in WWE. Come to WCW, he turned heel. All right. Turn heel, and you know, that's I to me, I think that's when the wars well, before then, but I think it really put a stamp on the war between WCW and WWE. And because you had Scott Hall and Kevin Nash coming over from WWE to WCW. You had Rick Rude who did the same thing. So it's a lot of wrestlers that from both promotions actually that went from one or the other. All right. But WCW was up for 83 weeks. And even if they were gloating in their success at that time, Vince McMahon, I think this would made Vince McMahon Vince McMahon. Um, One, he was always great at building characters, storylines, things of that nature, right? So when you think about the top talent that he had in his company, Bret Hart was a guy that comes to mind, a guy who's going to be the face of the company, and great WWE champion, one of the great wrestlers of all time. When you talk about in-ring action and everything like that, one of the all-time greats. And during that time, they did mention the Montreal screw job, which another thing I didn't know that this wasn't Vince McMahon's first time screwing over somebody when it in terms of like the title and everything. Who was it was a woman. Um what was her name? Wendy Richter. She was the first one to get screwed um, for not really doing what Vince wanted to do. So after that match, she was never seen again in WWE. All right. But Bret Hart had a feeling that night. If y'all go back, y'all know the Montreal screw job. He had a feeling that night something wasn't going to go right. That's what happened. Screw job. All right. No need to talk about it. That story has been talked about a lot. And I think what you saw there, I think this was the beginning of like the reemergence of WWE. You s- you saw the beginning of Mr. McMahon, the owner, the evil billionaire owner, um, my way or the highway type of guy. You saw a creation of a character, not on purpose. It just happened that way. And you start seeing, the layers peel back some. Because Vince was everything in this company. Vince, he was, and that was the thing I think you appreciate about Vince McMahon. He wasn't handed the keys to the company by his dad. His dad made him work for it. His dad made him a ring announcer. Um, have him help put up the rings, stuff like that. Um, commentary, do commentary and things like that. Vince did so much in order to build this business. And that's what I appreciate Vince because he wasn't handed the keys and like, oh, there you go. No, he actually had to put in work, and his dad made sure of it. Uh, but the character of Vince McMahon, or Mr. McMahon, uh, pretty much became the most popular villain of all time. All right. And now we're going to get into the Attitude Era, which is the era where I I grew up on was the Attitude Era. Now, after watching this documentary and talking to a coworker of mine, um, when I first thought about the Attitude Era, right, they gave credit to Shawn Michaels. Now, Shawn Michaels, when you talk about for that company, okay, yeah, I can see that. When you talk, I always felt like the Attitude Era pretty much started when Scott Hall, Kevin Nash went from WWE to WCW, forming the NWO. I felt like that's where it got started. But then my coworker pointed something out to me, right? He said the w- the person who probably the person in the company that probably don't get the credit in terms of ushering in the Attitude Era, Paul Heyman and ECW, which you have to agree, right? Because when you look at ECW, right, and how they grew, yeah, they had a very niche fan base, but that fan base grew even more, right, as time went on, right? Oh, excuse me. When you look at their style, it was strictly hardcore. I remember the wrestlers: Rob Van Dam, Sabu, Sandman, Dudley Boys, New Jack. And here's another thing too: a lot of those wrestlers went through ECW to get to WWE. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Brian Pillman, uh, Mick Foley. You see what I'm saying? You had Taz that was in there. Eddie Guerrero was there. Dean Malenko was in there. So you had a lot of, I mean, that company. After when my coworker spoke to me about it, it started made me think like, dang, they probably didn't even get the credit for the Attitude Era. Probably one because they didn't have a large platform to really come out and really discuss it. Okay. And well, really present itself. And Paul Heyman is a guy who I think should get way more flowers than what he deserves because he was the guy in a way, it was kind of interrupting what was going on between WCW and WWE with ECW, right? And their matches to me was much more exciting, in my opinion, because one, you gotta think, there ain't no rules. It's hardcore. Everything is hardcore. It doesn't matter which match it was, what match it was, anything like that. It was hardcore. But I feel like he also gave opportunities to those who necessarily wouldn't get it in WCW and WWE. And that's where Stone Cold comes into play. When you talk about the Attitude Era, Stone Cold is the face of of the Attitude Era, in my opinion. Right? It was built just for him, and it pretty much started in ECW. He got fired from WCW. Paul Heyman called him up like, "Hey, why don't you come here?" And he went. Yeah, that's when you start seeing his attitude and his natural character progress into what you see Stone Cold Steve Austin. So to me, Stone Cold Steve Austin really started in ECW, not WWE. I think WWE just capitalized off the name of it. Now, during the Attitude Era, the whole Monday Night Wars, as we all know, WCW didn't play the long game. WCW could have won this war. Vince McMahon could have been out of business, but Vince McMahon, during that time frame, Vince McMahon thought he was going against Ted Turner. He didn't really think about Eric Bischoff. And Eric Bischoff, to his credit, really, didn't know much about the wrestling business, but he turned WCW into a powerhouse, right? And signing top guys, you know, um, and stuff like that. Lex Luger, you already had Sting there. You have Hogan that Hogan came over. You look at Hall and Nash, they came through. Um, Obviously Bret Hart, which wasn't hard to do because we all knew the behind the scenes between Bret and Vince McMahon. Uh, so you had that, but they had a lot of misses. And this is why I said that this is why WWE won. WWE understood there's a shelf life for an athlete, right? To be on top, and then people wanted to see new stars. One thing about a story, eventually a story has to end, and you have to start a new story. And WCW kept playing the same story over and over and over again. But when it started to get watered down, WWE was continuing to build characters, create new stories so fans could stay engaged. And WCW had talent on their roster. You had Mark Calloway, who was the Undertaker. You had Stone Cold Steve Austin there. You had Mick Foley there, right? You had Chris Jericho. You had Booker T. You had Eddie Guerrero. Um, you had Chris Benoit that was there. You had who else? Rey Mysterio Jr. Like, come on, man. You had these top guys in your company, but they weren't there to build them up. It was all about what Hogan said. And I felt like this is where WCW folded because I feel like it wasn't um with the documentary I saw, even though they didn't talk too much about it, but what I got from it was I felt like Hogan was just calling all the shots. Bischoff was saying okay without really being the boss here. Um, all because Hogan had creative control. And I just felt like that was the downfall. Obviously, you had the finger poke of death that pretty much ruined WCW, the beginning of WCW. And that was that. All right. Uh, but yeah, WWE, they were forced to make new stars, and it paid off great for them. So while they were ascending, WCW was declining. Now, what I didn't know, I knew WWE bought out WCW. What I didn't know was how much they paid for it. when you find out they only paid $2.5 million for WCW, you were like, you gotta be kidding me. That's all it was. $2.5 million WCW. And some of those guys came over and had great careers in WWE. Booker T had a great career. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, Rey Mysterio. Who else from WCW had a great career? I'm talking about those who wasn't in WWE. Uh, that's all I can remember. Obviously, you have Chris Benoit, which they talked about that. Um, Matter of fact, let's talk about that. We all know the tragic story of Chris Benoit. Um, it's a sad story. It's tragic. It's something that you ever don't want to think about. If you want to know the story, you go watch Dark Side of the Ring. They talked about this, whatever. But uh, there was a former wrestler who wrestled in WWE. His career ended because of concussion, and we all remember that night. If you don't remember, if you're a wrestling fan, y'all remember the night when Chris Benoit died. They did a tribute the next day. They actually basically just canceled the whole Mr. McMahon, you know, death storyline, things like that. They just like, okay, we're just gonna shelve that to the side. We're gonna put it to the side. We're not gonna. They didn't even bring it back up. And they did a tribute to Chris Benoit. While that tribute was going on, details about the case comes about, and very tragic, tragic. It was a murder suicide. Um, Wife, young son, and himself, and a former WWE wrestler. I can't think of his name. He uh, he basically wanted to look into it. Now this is before the whole CTE thing, right? What we have now. You think about football players, you could think about boxers, MMA fighters, professional wrestlers, and everybody thought it was because of steroids, right? He had like roid rage and all of that stuff. No, he didn't have none of that. It was this guy who did a study. The family allowed them to study his brain, and come to find out, he basically had CTE, which caused this, right? And at first, Vince McMahon didn't believe it, right? He just didn't believe in it, which is funny. Which is funny though, because you want to know what caused this, right? You're in controversy again because you came out with a tribute without knowing the details. Okay. And after a while, Vince McMahon had to just cave in like, hey, listen, man, whatever you need, we'll be here to help you. So they mentioned that. All right, let's get back to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was a guy you could tell he wasn't going to let his throne go, right? He even told his son, if you want my spot, you're going to have to just stab me in the heart and get rid of me if you want my spot. Vince McMahon was not going to retire from wrestling, the wrestling business. That wasn't going to happen. Something had to happen to remove him from wrestling as a whole, which, if y'all know, recently the investigation um, that's going on with Vince McMahon basically forced him to be out of the wrestling company, right? And this man was a workaholic. He was a workaholic. Uh, Vince McMahon, excuse me, Vince McMahon wasn't a perfect guy. He did things. He admitted to some things during a Playboy interview, and you know when you watch stuff like that, and you say, "Well, he's doing all these things, but the wife is staying." Why? I guess apparently if you got money, you can do whatever you want to do. Apparently. Um, that was just my process. That's how I thought about it. Because after all the stuff he's done, all the things he was accused of, he's had numerous of lawsuits alleging, um, you know, essay and everything like that. That's at some point that's some is more to the story, right? And he and you know what? I'm a Paul Heyman said this best, and I remember him saying this. He said the only monogamous relationship Vince McMahon has ever had is with the business. And he has made some decisions that he thought was best for business. One of them came the fateful night Owen Hart tragically died at that pay-per-view in 99, where he fell from the top, hit the turnbuckle, and I mean, the blood was still in the ring. He died that night. He died right then and there. And he made the decision to keep the show going. He said because, it was, I guess they were doing the promotion, so it was a blackout, whatever. They didn't see what happened. I always ask myself, what about the fans that was like in the front? Because somebody else had saw something. And for the wrestlers that was in the back, they knew he was gone. Um, they showed the clip right after that because he was actually Owen Hart was supposed to wrestle the Godfather that night. And one of the hardest things I've seen in this documentary was Jeff Jarrett try to do a promo right after that happened. And you could see Deborah emotional. You could tell she couldn't. It was hard for them to continue on that night. You see the Undertaker looking at the spot where Owen died, right? That's where he died. Blood still on in the ring. And for them to continue on, this goes to show you that Vince will always do what's best for the business. And I felt like even watching the documentary, I felt like he felt he was bigger than the business, but no one's ever bigger than whatever business that they're in. That's just not how it works. And Vince McMahon, he felt like he was untouchable in his business, right? And when you get to that level of success, absolutely, absolutely, you're gonna feel that way. Now that doesn't mean he didn't have many failures. He started the XFL, didn't last too long. It was only one season. He had his own restaurant, didn't last. He had the hotel casino, didn't last. So he had some failures along the way, um, outside of WWE, outside the wrestling business. Okay. And even though, and here's another thing too, this docu-series took 3 years. 3 years. So the Undertaker's his interview was from 2021. I think who else? Trish Stratus. They talked about her angle, right? And they talked about how women was portrayed during that time, right? I think her interview took it was 2021, 2022. Yeah, Triple H, Stephanie McMahon, um, Shane McMahon, who uh was trying to begging his dad buy the UFC. Vince didn't want to buy it. Somebody else bought it, sold it for $4 billion and everything. Now it kind of came full circle when WWE sold their company to Endeavor, which Vince McMahon would actually oversee UFC and WWE. But with the new scandal and the investigation, basically just stepped down completely. Uh, and what Triple H did as a creator, I mean, he basically brought wrestling back to the hardcore fans, right? What else happened? Who else was interviewed in it? Paul Heyman, man. Listen, I'll definitely would like to see a Paul Heyman docu-series, ECW. I definitely would like to see something like that because that is amazing. I feel like that would be amazing. Who else? Obviously, I mentioned Tony Atlas. Hulk Hogan was another guy. You had brief cameos from Stone Cold, Steve Austin, and Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock. That's pretty much, and Bret Hart. You had it for Bret Hart. Um, then of course you had some current guys, like John Cena, Booker T, um, Wendy Wendy Rector. She was in the documentary as well. But they all asked, like, I think the last question was what would Vince McMahon's legacy be, or what, it was something to that nature. And most of them couldn't even answer the question. Most of them couldn't answer the question. Vince McMahon, I always felt like was always about wrestling, and he would do anything and everything that's best for business. I mean, that's just my opinion about this. After watching this, like I said, a lot of this stuff I already knew. I know he gambled a lot on a lot of things. He was afraid of going out of business because of WCW and stuff like that. But his drive to succeed, that's something to be admired about because he had that drive in him. Now, I will say this too. One person that doesn't get credit is Linda McMahon because she worked behind the scenes while Vince McMahon was in front of the scenes. So I want to, give Linda McMahon her credit for helping that business grow. So shout out to her. But overall, my overall take about this, and Vince McMahon didn't finish the docuseries, by the way, because of the when the allegations were made public, he stopped. But they got quite a bit from Vince McMahon, and you really understand his mindset growing up poor, um, an abusive household, to creating this empire of WWE. You understand it, and you always want to congratulate someone on their journey to success. But there's a lot of decisions that had to be made, and he always would do what's best for the business. Always. E- Even if it means not passing the company down to his children, which I think Paul Heyman said it best, it was never gonna get passed down because it became too big. So it wasn't a family business anymore. Um, Overall, Vince McMahon, the biggest name in pro wrestling history, no doubt about it. Greatest wrestling promoter, probably the great, and also the Mr. McMahon character, the greatest character, because you could plug in many different scenarios, right? Obviously, the feud, it started with Bret Hart, but it got heightened with Stone Cold Steve Austin. Then you had The Rock, then you had Triple H, Undertaker, stuff like that during that time frame. And uh it's one of those moments where you appreciate what he has done, but that even back then, like the stories that you hear, listen, man, it's been told so many times. And overall, I probably would give the docu-series a C overall. So that's just my take. Y'all let me know what y'all feel about the docu-series if you've seen it. If there was something that you wanted to know more about, um, hey, maybe y'all could dig it up yourselves, the research and everything. Oh, and Bob Costas, I forgot about him. Bob Costas, he was actually part of the business as a ring announcer at one point. So didn't know that. At that time I wasn't even born yet when that happened. So, but overall, it was just okay. It was an okay docu series. All right. All right, y'all. Thanks for tuning in with me tonight. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up and subscribe to Drinking After Dark Podcast YouTube channel. Also, follow on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Also, you could watch Drinking After Dark Podcast on YouTube, listen on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. Thanks again for tuning in with me tonight. Until next time, I'm Darius, and we out. Peace.
Gotta get to the money. Gotta get to the money. Early morning, so you know that I'm on it. So you know that I'm on it. Gotta make sure that my family straight.